Ayatollah Khomeini, who obviously went on to become the supreme leader after the revolution, was actually far from controlling the events that took place around the revolution for much of it. He was in a relatively weak position in relation to the forces that had actually created the revolution itself. You had the existence of workers' councils, or shuras, as they were called, which came up around the revolution, which obviously were massively inspired by leftist ideas. The universities, again, were massively influenced by leftist ideas. Students were very much a part of that. But to understand how we can get from a position where somebody like Ayatollah Khomeini had very little presence and very little power to the point to where he was orchestrating things, we have to look at the failures of the left, the Iranian left at that time. We absolutely have to do that. And the basic fact about the Iranian left at the time, and obviously you could go on for a long time about this, but they were full of divisions, first of all, and essentially they were full of divisions because they suffered massively from essentially being inspired by Stalinist ideology. That was a real major factor to the failures of the Iranian left, is that they were completely run, if you like, by the line coming up from Moscow. And obviously, we know being run by Stalinist ideology can be pretty bad consequences for any political movement at any time, but particularly at a time when the idea of Stalinism was, very much on the wane, was kind of on its way out the door and pretty much in crisis. So what you had a left which was constantly flip-flopping between positions. On the one hand, they would come out and, be completely uncritical of Khomeini, completely uncritical of the Islamists, and say absolutely nothing at all. And then on the other hand, you had other leftist groups who believed that guerrilla warfare or guerrilla tactics were the way to win things, and completely separated themselves off from the vast majority of the Iranian population. And both of those things, although they are very different in their failings, they both suffer from from not understanding the working class as the agent for change in society. And I think that was one of the real major errors that was made. And so the left, as a result, never even really came near to being the vanguard of the working class that could take the working class into power in Iran. So the situation essentially was that you had the two major classes in society paralyzed. You had the old Shah monarchy unable to hold on to power. The Shah had fled. But then you had the working class, a strong movement of people with absolutely no leadership to be able to fill that void and fill that power vacuum that had opened up in society. And this is where I want to mention very quickly in passing the theory of deflected permanent revolution, which is developed by Tony Cliff, who's one of the founders of the International Socialists and one of later on the Socialist Workers' Party, who developed this theory, looking specifically at China and Cuba and others. But what he said was, when you have this situation in society where the two major classes are unable to take hold of power, another middle-class force will emerge into that gap as a result. And that's absolutely what happened in Iran. It was an Islamic intelligentsia who took power, who moved themselves into that power vacuum. A movement who left the capitalist relations of production in the society intact, but at the same time transformed organisation and ownership of capital into their own hands. But it was the Iraqi invasion into Iran in 1980 that obviously was backed and funded by the United States. In many ways we should see the Iraq war on Iran in 1980 almost as the response of the United States imperialism to the Iranian Revolution. They completely supported the Iraqi army and supported Saddam Hussein. And it was such a catastrophe for the revolution, for the revolution, if you like, really, because it really put a hold on everything. It stopped everything from carrying on. When you had firstly a major nationalist cause, which actually is important to understand today when we talk about America threatening Iran. That the nationalist cause had the effect of very much destabilising and almost uniting the population in a way against a common enemy. And so, basically, to cut a long story short there, the revolution was put on hold by the presence of the war. But once the war had finished, the regeneration of that battle of ideas that happened around 1979, that explosion of political thought, political discussion, absolutely started up again, and it began to re-emerge in the early 90s. But by now, there were deep contradictions inside the Iranian society that actually made the ground for a new movement, for a new reform movement, actually even better and even stronger. Iran had undergone in the 1980s a period of welfare reforms that had benefited large swathes of the Iranian population. It meant that many young people had been able to go to university and become educated, and as a result had the means to challenge the state.